What? Wait a second. Goodness said, "Hi, Irene. It's 4:05." Look, you guys, honestly, what's really weird is I definitely would have been late for this live. The only reason I'm on time is I really wanted to pull up the court cases. Like, I didn't want to start saying things without being able to present them. And then I had to screenshot like excerpts from like the court cases. And I literally just finished. Otherwise, I wouldn't even be here because you guys know I schedule lives because you guys have sort of pressured me into scheduling lives. You guys were like, Irene, can you stop like randomly popping up at 2 a.m. in the morning and just having a random live and then making it private? So I was like, okay, I hear you guys. I understand. I'll stop having lives in the middle of the deep dark night and then making them private. So I started trying to like schedule the lives. But in reality, if in a perfect world, there would be no clocks and we would all just be, what do they call it when you can read people's minds? I don't know. You could all just be mind readers. There's like a technical word for it. And when I was going live, you guys would all just sense my thoughts and just show up. So the fact that if I'm even remotely, I don't even know when this live was supposed to start. But if I'm even remotely, even kind of sort of on time, it is a pure coincidence. It's literally not by design. Last night, I was like really determined and it just worked out. But today, y'all, this live almost didn't happen on time because I was deep in research. You guys know I start researching things and then I go down like rabbit holes and then the live never happens. My patrons are still waiting on me to do a video on black femicide, and the only reason the video is not made is because like the more I research, the more I find that I want to research, and then I get stuck in like research mode and then I can never make the video because I'm still the Jew video. Like, you guys remember, who remembers when I was going to make a video about the Jews? I'm still researching that video. It's been like flipping months. It's been like 6 months and I'm still reading stuff. And the more I read, the less I feel I want to make the video because I'm like, it won't be comprehensive. It won't be comprehensive. But today I stopped myself. I was like, just stop, Irene. Just stop being crazy. Yeah, Stargazer said I end up being up at 2 in the morning. Yeah. A lot of people were like, it's mad early in the morning here. Can you stop doing your lives in the middle of the night and then making them private? So I'm trying. Anyway, so let's talk about welfare over husbands. This is something that I hear talked about a lot in Black spaces, especially among the men. That part of the reason that Black women are basically functioning under a matriarchy, part of the reason that Black men are not in the home is that Black women have opted and chosen to have, you know, relationships with the government versus relationships with actual men. Now, I'm not here to argue my personal opinion about these topics. Um, I do have a personal opinion and I will be sharing it, but I'm not here to argue my personal opinion. I'm here to give some historical context to these things and then demonstrate how the historical context, the court cases, and the actual independent research and interviews that have been done prove that that is a cop out. And essentially, Black men are not in the house because of welfare. And there are a lot of things I'm about to bring up today that I hope many of you have not heard of before. So let me start with welfare itself and how welfare began. Okay. I want to start there. So, first and foremost, you guys know I have opinions about the Social Security Act and all of that. And I have a whole video on this channel, a couple of videos, where I talk about the Social Security Act and Social Security numbers and things like that. So I'm probably one of the few people in America who have ever actually read the Social Security Act and have read the court cases, because there were two Supreme Court cases before the Social Security Act was passed down. And the Social Security Act wasn't solely about retirement, and the Social Security Act wasn't solely about taxing Americans' personal income. It also had to do with the care of children, because as we discussed, as we looked at the article we looked at last night, in America, it is a patriarchy. Not by my word, but by the government's word. The government of the United States openly has published multiple documents stating that America is a patriarchy. And in a patriarchy, and at a time where women had very few rights, it was expected that men took care of women and children. And what was happening is that men were not taking care of women and children. And you also had the elderly. And so they started to want to tax personal income to support women, children, and the elderly specifically. This was the reason the Social Security Act was written. The Supreme Court shot it down once. We won't look at that case right now because that's not really relevant to this. And then it was given to a higher Supreme Court, and they decided that the Social Security Act was constitutional. And part of this Social Security Act, and this excerpt that you're looking at right here, I didn't write this. This is actually from Social Security itself, like the government said this. This is what the government has to say. And so it says Social Security for children. This was part of the Social Security Act. So I want to be clear, when I'm discussing the Social Security Act, I'm talking about specifically the Social Security Act of 1935. So we're backing it up to 1935, okay? So in 1935, this is what they were saying. This is verbatim what the court said. A large group of children at present maintained by relief will not be aided by employment or unemployment compensation. They are the fatherless and other young families without a breadwinner. Because remember, America is a patriarchy, not because Irene says so, but because that's what the government says. The government says America is a patriarchy. And so when a child is fatherless and there is no breadwinner, meaning there's no man from the family around, then the children were starving. It says to meet the problems of the children in these families, no less than 45 states have enacted children's aid laws, generally called mothers' pension laws. These were laws that were created specifically for mothers, and the original goal of the law, because women, their main job, no matter how the feminists feel, no matter how the 50-50 men feel, the main job of women when they give birth is to be able to stay at home with their children, to breastfeed, to nurture little children. And so these laws were initially passed to give women enough money to stay at home with their children. But this changed later on. Don't get excited, because some men are like, aha, I told you she was replacing the father. Calm down. Calm down, sir. Don't get excited, because the women weren't getting that much money. This was how the law was originally written, but that's not how it was executed. And I have the Supreme Court cases to prove it, right? So if the child was fatherless, if there were no male breadwinners, there were set up mother's pension laws. All right. And so the goal of it was that they were recommending federal grants in aid on the basis of one half of the state and local expenditures for this purpose. So they were like, look, the states are finding all these women who don't have men in the home, and these children need their mothers. So we, as the federal government, want to extend some money to ensure that, because let me tell you what was happening to the kids. If the father left the mother and the mother had no money and there were no male family members to care for her and her child, the state was taking the children. They would take children away from their mothers and they would put them in orphanages. I want to be clear on what was going on. The state was coming into not just Black families, but white families as well. And if a mother, let's say if a man ran off and abandoned his wife and child, let's say if a husband died, if anything happened, right? And the woman was left alone with the child. If she was poor, the state would come in and they would take her child away and they would put her child in an orphanage. And so part of what they put in the Social Security Act was that we need to stop taking women's children from them simply because there is no breadwinner, simply because there is no man around. America is a patriarchy, and we understand that women are disadvantaged. This is what the government said. And so we want to provide some support for women who don't have men to take care of them. We need to stop kidnapping their children and putting their kids in orphanages. Now, the government wasn't being, wonderful, loving people by doing this. Orphanages cost money and they didn't know what to do with the kids. So they figured, well, let's stop stealing these kids and taking them away from their mothers. Let's keep the kids in the home. Yes, Alpha and Omega, you're absolutely right. After World War One, this was exasperated for white women. Let's be clear. So Alpha said this World War One had a lot to do with it. And that's true, but it's because white women didn't have their husbands. It's because a lot of white women were widowed. And that's why I said the government wasn't being benevolent. They were like, oh my goodness, we're not going to be snatching up all these little white children, right? And so women as a whole of all races ended up benefiting from these programs because the government was like, we can't just be stealing and taking the children of women simply because there's not a man in the home. So what can we do to stop this? All right. What can we do? Because women were at the time traditionally meant to stay in the home. What can we do to prevent this from happening? And again, like I said, this was very controversial because at the time, right? At the time, people didn't pay personal income tax. And I want to be clear that aid to women is not the only reason we pay personal income tax. They just kind of threw that in there because they wanted people to agree with it. It was retirement benefits. It was the care of elderly people because families were not taking care of elderly people. It were all of these things. And the Supreme Court originally was like, the government can't be taxing people's income. But as they piled on all these social services, then people were like, okay, well, yeah, we do need to take care of the elderly. We do need to take care of women who don't have men in the home, right? And to kind of propagandize the public, they came out with this. This is an example of the posters that they used to give out to aid dependent children because they were trying to sell the public on this idea so that dependent children can grow up in their own families. Because if they didn't grow up in their own families, they would have to go to orphanages, right? They were taking women's children and putting them in orphanages. If a man abandoned you in the 1930s, they took your kid. If your husband died in the 1930s, they took your kid. If there wasn't a man in your family around to take care of you and your child, they took your child, right? And so they said, so that dependent children can grow up in their own families, the federal government and the states provide cash allowances. More children thus will have a chance to live normal, wholesome lives in their own families. Social Security Board. So they were posting these posters around. And this is not the topic of this video, but I really want to give a background. I really want to give a background on this because when we hear people running around talking about women chose money over, over husbands, I really want to lay out, how did these programs start, and did women actually choose money over husbands? And I'm about to prove with some Supreme Court cases that women literally went to court to fight to keep men in the home. Women literally were in court arguing with the government to keep men who were not even breadwinners, men who did not care for their households. They went about trying to fight to keep these men in the home. And I'm going to prove this. I'm going to prove this unequivocally. This is not even a debatable topic. Let's go to the next thing. The first thing I want to discuss is who qualified for the AFDC program. And then we're going to get into these court cases. All right. All of the resources I'm using are from the government. I will be more than happy if you guys want to post every single resource that I used, but I clearly I just went to the government because the government knows what it was doing. You may not know and I may not know, but do you know who does know? The government knows what they were doing. So basically, under the Act, this is what is literally written in the Social Security Act. A dependent child is defined as one who has been deprived of parental support. A child has to be deprived of parental support or care because the father is dead, because of their continued absence, meaning the father isn't always around, or incapacity of a parent. Maybe the father's in jail. Insofar as it is relevant in this case, aid can be granted under the provision only if the parent of a child is continually absent from the home. Now listen to me. As we discuss this, this is what the Social Security Act says. So what ended up happening is that in this particular case, all right, and the case is called King versus Smith. King versus Smith. In King versus Smith, there was a woman who went to the court and said, hey, yo, if I even try to have a relationship with the man, I can lose my benefits. If I try to find a husband, and in order for me to find a husband, I have to be able to engage men. This man is not the father of my child. I want a man in the home. I want a man to help me with my children. I'm looking for a breadwinner, but I can lose my benefits because the state says if this man is around, I can't get benefits, even though this man is not financially supporting my children. So in this case, and I want to give you the name of the case again, you guys can feel free to check. In this case, King versus Smith, the woman went to the court and said, this is not right. The government should not be doing this. And you know what the court said? The court agreed with her. Because in Alabama, which like every other state that had social programs, they considered if a man was living, because there were men in these houses, if a man was living with a woman, if a man was spending a significant time in the home, they called him a substitute father. And so that woman could not get social services. She could not get cash assistance. So this idea that women were pushing men out of the home for social services is an absolute lie. Not only were the men in the home, but the men were in the home at the risk of the woman losing her aid, to the point that the women started to challenge this in court. Women were going to court demanding that they be allowed to have men in the home. Women were going to court saying, this man is not a father, this man is not contributing, but, right, you guys are taking my services away. This should be illegal. The state should not be able to take my services. So how did the court rule, right? It said the regulation applies regardless of whether the man is the child's father. It applies whether or not the man is obligated to contribute to their support, or in fact, if he does so. So Mrs. Smith, who was a mother of 4 children, this woman had 4 kids, and she was terminated off of the program because she wanted a man in the home. Because the father, the so-called substitute father regulation, said that Mr. Williams, who was the man that she had living in her home, because he came to her home on the weekend and because he was giving her the D, literally, this is what came out in court. He was coming to her home on the weekends and he was having sex with her. He was not helping her take care of her family, but he was coming there. He was having sex with her on the weekends. And because of that, they terminated her social services. She did not choose social services over a husband. There was a man that was having sex with this woman who had 4 children every single weekend. He gave her no money whatsoever. And when the social services agency terminated her, she went to court to fight for her right to get the D. Now, you guys make of this what you want, both men and women. I mean, I have my personal opinions on this, but I'm not going to include my personal opinions yet. I'm just going to say that I'm about to prove a pattern of behavior of women who are poor and who receive these programs, that they risk everything to have a man in their home. These women, these poor women, are not putting men out of their houses. I'm about to show a pattern of behavior from the 1930s into the 1960s, 70s, 80s, and 90s into the present day of women who are poor and receive social welfare, risking everything to have a man in the home. These women weren't pushing men out of the home. This mother of 4 was getting dicked down every single weekend by a man who didn't financially contribute to her home. And when the social services program threw her off of social services, she went to court to fight for the right to have this man give her sex. No support, but just sex. And this is not me making this up. This is the real court case. Can you imagine being in court and having to explain why a man was having sex with you on the weekends but wasn't contributing to your household, so you should still be able to receive welfare? But this is what the women were out there doing. So when I hear men saying women chose social welfare over having a man in the house, it's like, well, sir, that's not what history tells us. History tells us these women were in court fighting for the right to have men in the house, even men who could not financially support them, which is disturbing. I almost would rather that the men were right about this. I'm almost ashamed to say that the men are wrong, that women were not choosing social welfare over men. In fact, they were choosing any man, the possibility of a man. Let's carry on. Mr. Williams was not the father of any of her children. He was not obliged to pay support for them, and he did not help take care of her kids. This is according to the court. So the women got together and had a class action lawsuit. It wasn't just the one woman. It was a whole bunch of mothers on welfare. A whole bunch of women on welfare got together and had a class action lawsuit to keep men in the home. When I tell you that Black women are not about this matriarchy, Black women are not about this matriarchy. They're not about a matriarchy, even if men are broke. They're not about matriarchy. These poor, impoverished women on welfare got together and started a class action lawsuit to stop the state from taking their benefits based on who they were having sex with or whether a man was regularly coming into their home to have sex with them, but not to actually lead their households. You cannot make this crap up. So what did the state said? The state said that the regulation for a non-absent parent was a legitimate way of allocation. You guys, you cannot make this stuff up. That's why a lot of these conversations on YouTube don't make sense. These conversations don't make sense. These broads were out here having class action lawsuits to keep men in the home. That's the actual and complete opposite of not wanting a man in the home. These broads were so desperate to have a man in the home, it didn't matter if he provided or not. They weren't like, look, I don't want you, man. The state's got this. The state is taking care of my baby. That's not what these women were saying. These women were going to court fighting against this. These women were all up in court trying to prevent this from happening. They filed hundreds. I'm pointing out one court case. These women filed hundreds of court cases throughout several states to keep men in the home, even if those men were not contributing to the care of their family. This is not me saying this. This is like actual documented court history. Now, you can feel about that however you want to feel about it. I haven't brought out my personal judgment on this yet. I'm just saying, let's at least have the argument from a factual standpoint. These women did want men in the home. These women were not picking social services over men. Not when they're going to court by the hundreds to keep men in the home. That's not what they're doing. In 1970, all right, to prove that this is not about money, because the first argument was, oh, well, women didn't want men in the house. Well, okay, we've proven women did want men in the house. We've proven women were going to court by the hundreds to keep men in the house. Women were going to court just so that they could have sex with men. Women were going to court for men who didn't even help their families. Women were going to court saying this is an injustice. We want men. So then the other argument is, okay, well, women were doing this for money. They're getting so much money from the government. It's a windfall. All this money from the government makes them not want men in the house because the government is giving them so much money. Well, this is funny because the government was not giving them so much money. In fact, the way that the original act was written, remember back when I started this live, when I was reading the Social Security Act itself, the part that pertained to women and children? And remember when I said that the original intention of the Social Security Act was that women would be able to stay home and be stay-at-home mothers with their children. So originally, women were supposed to get enough money so that they could stay at home and be stay-at-home mothers. But when the states implemented the actual ADC, or what was then changed to AFDC program, they didn't give out that much money. In fact, back in 1970, a class action lawsuit was started because not only did they not give the women enough money to be stay-at-home moms, they gave her almost no money. These women were getting $270 a month. And that was not meeting the standard of need of an eligible family unit. That was not enough money for them to actually take care of their families. So these women went to court and said, hey, originally the Social Security Act was written to compensate for us not having husbands or men that support our families. And I am getting not 270, $250 a month. I can't support a family on $250 a month. It didn't matter the size of the family. It didn't matter what the need of the family was. And do you know what the court said? The court said, too bad for you. Too bad for you, lady. That's what the court said. The court said, you're not getting any more money. The court said, you're not getting any more money. We're not giving you crap. You can't have anything. You're not getting a penny more. The district court upheld the regulation on the basis that it was invalid on its face for overreaching. It said, look, hey, no more money for you. You better deal with these pennies. And what we see now is since then there have been subsequent caps. So this idea that people on welfare are getting a windfall, absolutely not. People on welfare don't get a windfall. These women, first of all, they were fighting to keep men in the home, and then they weren't getting enough money, so they were all up in court trying to talk about how they were broke and didn't have any money. They're like, you don't want us to have men, but you won't give us money. We're out here fighting to keep men in the home, and we're out here fighting to get more than $250 a month, regardless of family size. Now you know that if you've been on welfare for 1 year in 2022, if you were on welfare for more than a year, you do not get any additional money for any children that you give birth to. So the regulations are very similar. I want to continue because this doesn't stop there. But hold on, before I continue, let me get the cord for my Mac. I want to continue. So we've moved up. Let's look at the Oh my goodness, I'm sorry. Let's look at the time frame that I've covered. I started with the Social Security Act itself when ADC was started, all the way back in the 30s, okay? I've moved forward into the 50s and the 60s, where women were going to court by the hundreds, to try to keep men in the home, going to court saying that it wasn't right that the state was taking their benefits. You had a woman with 4 kids having sex with the man on a weekend, all up in court trying to keep this man in her house, despite the fact that he wasn't helping with anything. I mean, I don't know who's the bigger fool here, the men or the women. The men for sitting here arguing that women chose government over husbands, or the women for being in court by the hundreds to try to keep men in the house that weren't helping them. I don't know who the bigger fools are in this situation. Personally, I don't know who's the more dumb of the two. Let's keep moving forward though. Let's keep going. So I'm about to bring it closer to modern day, but before I do, there's one last case that I want to look at. The women were so determined to have men in the house. So what have I shown you so far? I talked about the original Social Security Act, why it was implemented. I've talked about the pushback by the hundreds throughout all of the states that had these social services program that women were giving because they wanted to keep men in the home. I've talked about how the women were not getting enough money to sustain themselves. So this idea that way back in the day, women started throwing men out the house because they were getting all this money is a lie. Because these women were in court talking about $250 is not enough. You guys aren't even living up to what you said you were going to do. So these women did not have money. They were fighting to keep men in the home. And then they kept bringing men in the home. So do you know what the government did? The government said, well, since you guys won't stop bringing men in the home, we're going to start doing random checks on your home. Some people are old enough to remember this. The government said, we're going to start doing random checks on your home. Let's look at this. Large family recipients of benefits under the Aid to Families with Dependent Children AFDC program brought this suit to enjoin the application of Maryland's maximum grant regulation contravening the Social Security Act of 1935 and the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. So multiple female-led families went to court. Under the program, which is jointly financed by the federal and state governments, the state computes the standard of need of eligible family units. Under the Maryland regulation, though most families, so I want to be, hold on. Wait, that's not the one I want to read. Hold on. 1 second. I want to look at Wayman versus James. Hold on. My mistake. I want to look at Wayman versus James. Let's look at Wayman versus James. All right. So New York, this is the state of New York. New York's Aid to Families with Dependent Children, AFDC program, stressing close contact with beneficiaries, requires home visits by caseworkers for assistance. So remember, this is after women went to court by the hundreds to keep men in the home. This is after women were going to court because they were not getting that much money. They weren't getting enough money for it to make sense. They then went to court because the courts were so determined that these women would not stop letting men in their homes that they started doing home checks on the women. In order that any treatment or service tending to restore beneficiaries to a condition of self-support and to relieve their distress may be rendered, and that assistance or care may be given only in such amount as long as necessary, visitation with the beneficiary, who is the primary source of information to welfare authorities as to eligibility for assistance, is not permitted outside of working hours, and forcible entry and snooping are prohibited. The appellee, a beneficiary under the AFDC program, after receiving several days of advance notice, refused to permit a caseworker to enter her home. I'm about to show you a case in the 21st century where a woman refused to let caseworkers enter her home. But this is back in the 70s because women have been very consistent about this life. She was terminated from assistance because she wouldn't let the caseworker in her home. She then engaged in a class action lawsuit contending that a home visitation is a search and when not consented to or supported by a warrant based on probable cause was a violation of her 14th Amendment rights. Those of you who have watched my video on the Social Security number, remember when I said when you get a Social Security number or when you take benefits from the government, you waive your constitutional rights? This is what these women learned. And the court said, you know what, Broad? You better let them come in your house and do that search. The court said that a home visitation for receipt of AFDC funds was an administrative tool and did not violate the rights of the women. It was not a violation of their 14th Amendment rights. It said essentially that even if a home visitation had the characteristics of a traditional search, and I'm about to go into the account of a woman where the social services worker brought police officers with guns into her house. And that those police officers put guns on her children. I want you to remember this when I bring up this woman's story. It said, even if the home visitation has some of the characteristics of a traditional search, meaning a search that police officers would do if they had a warrant, New York's program is reasonable as it serves the paramount needs of the dependent child and enables the state to determine that the intended objects of its assistance benefits and from its aid and that state funds are being properly used. They say that even if the police show up with weapons in a woman's home, that it is not a criminal investigation if a caseworker is present. It does not require a warrant because a warrant would imply criminal conduct, and that it comports with the objectives of the welfare administration. It goes on to say that if a woman was to refuse the home visitation because it is legal, that she can have her benefits terminated. So where are we at? I just want to recap where we are at in this conversation. You have a poor woman who does not have the financial support of the father of her children, who goes on social welfare. These poor women attempt to engage men in relationships in the hope of getting married and creating a stable household for their children. The United States government and the several 50 states refuse to allow these women to even have men regularly visit their homes without taking their welfare. So these women start to go to court by the hundreds to say that what the state is doing is wrong. They are led by a woman with 4 kids who has a man coming to her house to have sex with her on the weekends, but in no way, shape, or form financially contributes to this household. The state says the women have a good point. The women then return to the state because they cannot replace a fully grown man with a stable income with state support, and they say, hey, I'm getting almost no money from the state. I can barely survive with my kids. The state tells them, too bad for you, lady, you're not getting any more money out of us. So we know two things. Number one, women do want men in the home, and they went to court hundreds of times so that they could have men in their home. Number two, that women do not get enough money from the government to replace a man, and they went to court hundreds of times to try to get more money because they could not get men to help leave their families, and the state was not providing them enough money to live a comfortable life. So we know that it wasn't about getting men out of the home in replacement of the state, and we know that women do not get enough money to replace a fully grown, able-bodied man who is working. And then number three, the state still felt these women were going too hard to have men in their homes. So the government upheld that the state could go in these women's homes with weapons, with guns. It could look like a search and seizure for a criminal activity. However, because it was in the guise, under the guise of making sure that these women were actually eligible for support services, that these searches would not be considered illegal, that these services would not be considered illegal. And through all of this, the women were still trying to keep men in their home. But it gets better. Oh, but it gets better. I have a paper that was written by a man. I have a paper here that was written by a man. And this man wanted to come in because he wanted to talk about these men not being in the house. And so do you know what he did? He went and he started interviewing poor people. This man went and started interviewing poor people. And as I read the results of his interviews, I want you guys to just ask yourself one question, okay? I just want you to ask yourself just one question. I want you to be honest. Whether you're a man or a woman, I want you to be honest about something. Does this sound like anybody you know? I want us to let's put the gender war aside. Let's just keep it 1,000 with each other. I want you to tell me if this sounds like anybody you know. As we read through his interviews with poor women, as we read through his interviews with welfare and Section 8 recipients. Now, we've started in the 1930s and now we're moving into the 2000s, okay? Let's fast forward to the common day. And I want you to see with what consistency these poor women who are being accused of not wanting men in the home, with what consistency they have attempted to keep men in their home at all costs. With what consistency these poor women have attempted to support men who are also poor at all costs. I want to be really clear on this. I want to move away from, look, let's just look at his interviews. I'm happy that a man did this. I don't know what he thought when he started this, but I have to say that I know that his opinion on this situation had to change after he did these interviews. Because when I was reading these interviews, I was like, this just sounds like, poor women trying to make it happen. So first of all, let me say it's not about keeping men out of the home. It's about the eligibility requirements in this day and age, because we have a lesbian woman. Let's start with the lesbians, okay? Because I don't want the men to think that we're picking on men. Let me start with a lesbian woman. This woman is an entire lesbian out here. She doesn't even have sex with men. Listen to what she said. When I first moved up here, they came to my house and brought the housing authority with them to my house. And because they were saying that a man lived in my house, well, a man didn't live in my house. I'm actually a lesbian. So yes, that's my stuff. And so my owner had to tell them, yeah, she's a lesbian. I knew when I rented to her. This is how she came to me. This is her appearance when she came to me, so I know. So this woman was a butch lesbian. She was a lesbian, but she had a girlfriend. And the girlfriend just happened to be at the house when they decided to search her house. Also, the girlfriend was using her address for a mailing address. The girlfriend didn't live there, but they took her housing just because of that. All right? Listen to this story. They came into my house like I have no record. I've never been in trouble, nothing major with my then teenager high school kids, but they came in with shotguns. Listen to this. They came into her house with shotguns. They came in with vests. They came in riot gear. They held guns on us like we were criminals. They surrounded my house. Well, this is what they told me. They said I had been randomly selected for a compliance check, it's called. So when the man knocked on the door, I could see his badge. And I'm like, why are you here? I have a reinspection tomorrow. I was expecting him, but the next day he goes, oh, you've been selected for reinspection. I mean, for a compliance check. And I said, why are all these police here? My heart was beating so fast, it was about to burst out of my chest. He said, they're with me. And I said, well, you can't come in. I don't have nothing to hide, but they can't come in. They don't have a warrant, and they are not coming in. This poor woman, this is a woman, and she doesn't know that she doesn't have any rights. She doesn't know about this Supreme Court case I just told you about that says that they can come and do whatever they want, that they can bring guns in her house, that they can treat her like a criminal. When I hear these men running around talking about women have a choice, I'm like, what are you saying? These women have been going to court to keep you around. They have been fighting to keep men around. These women are being terrorized. These poor women are not living the fabulous life without a man. This is not a life that they're happy about. This woman doesn't sound happy. She's over here thinking she has the right to tell these people they can't come in because they don't have a warrant. And he told me, if they don't come in, then you're going to lose your Section 8. And they go where I go. And I said, well, why do you need all these people for just me? It's nothing but me and the kids here. And he responded, well, that's up to us to figure out. They're looking. And when I say they looked, they did a massive search on my house. They went through my drawers. They held guns on my children. They went in my kitchen drawers, in my son's drawer. They pulled out an ID and some money and said, bam, and threw it on the table at me and said, ha, who is this? That's what the officer said. Yeah, we got her. Who is this? I said, that's my son. He's on the contract, and that's his little change from his Walmart job. What? And he said, oh, yeah, she's right. The only thing in my mind, y'all, can I keep it real with you? A lot of people tell me that I am out of touch because I did not grow up poor. But as a woman who did not grow up poor, as a woman where every hardship in my life has been because maybe I was rebelling against my family or, I wanted to try to make it on my own. As I read over these court cases and I read what these women were saying happened to them, the inside of my stomach started crawling Because I could only think back on all the times I hear these women being put down. I hear people saying they don't want men in the home. I hear people acting like they have a choice. I hear people acting like they're getting all this money and they're choosing to be single mothers on welfare and get child support because that is so much easier than having a man leave their household. And I have to tell you, in my research, that's not what I found. These women are terrorized. These women are terrorized. These women have gone to court by the tune of the hundreds to try to get rights to have normal families that include men. These women are getting little to no money. They are struggling. They are truly poor. These women have sat and had Supreme Courts tell them that if people come in your home with police officers and guns, that it's perfectly legal even though you are not a criminal, because they need to make sure that you are not trying to have a man there. I can't tell you how it disgusts me to hear that a mother with 4 children went to court because she lost her benefits because some no account sorry son of a bitch was comfortable laying down in a bed and having sex with her on the weekends, but felt no obligation to her family. And that her self-esteem was so low and in the gutter that the one thing that she was willing to fight for was to have a man. And this is coming from a woman who promotes marriage. You guys know I am pro-marriage. I am pro-patriarchy. So when men come together in these social media spaces and they are attacking women, I'm like, have any of us actually looked at the historiography behind this? Are we just claiming that women wanted this? Because everything I see is that these women don't want this, and that the state knows that they don't want this. So the state actually treats these women like crap. The state actually strips these women of their civil rights and says that it is perfectly legal because they are poor and because they have no one to support them. We're going to get to women helping men. Somebody said a lot of women did receive benefits and the men coached them on how to keep getting them. Let me tell you, we're about to get to that because these women talk about everything. These women talk about everything. They talk about absolutely everything. Let's go to another account. Another woman, her name is Janae, she says she has had the police harass her. Right here. She has had the police harass her. Yeah, she's had police harassment due to my nephew getting in trouble. But it was like once everything was clear, they still continued to pop up at her house. They still continued to drive by her house daily. If there was a younger suspect in that same neighborhood that they felt hung out with my nephews, they would come to her house again. So it's really hard for her not to have any, to be taken away, to have her Section 8 taken away, to not give her a chance because of something some young kids did or something that someone else did that she didn't have control over. They take it all away from her. And it's one more other issue that I've had with also with the housing authority and also with society up here. For instance, if I have a son that goes to prison and my son gets out of prison and I'm his only family, do you know what? My son can't come to my house because he's on parole. These women, listen, I know 2 friends of mine that were incarcerated because extra people were in their house and they got incarcerated. You know, I'm not saying that they weren't right. I'm just saying And the author, right? The interviewer says they got incarcerated for it. They just didn't get their housing taken away. She said, no, not the voucher taken away. I guess they had extra. I guess they was being investigated for a long time, And I'm not saying they were right, having extra people live there. But sometimes the economy is so bad and you've got to do what you've got to do. Not saying break the law, right? She's saying, I'm not saying that they should break the law, but sometimes people are just getting out of jail. She's talking about men. She's saying sometimes these men are just getting out of jail. Sometimes these men are our family and they don't have anywhere to go. Sometimes times are hard. And she's like, I'm not saying people should break the law, but it should be understandable that we want to help them. It seems to me like there are men in these houses. These women are saying these men are around. These are our brothers and our nephews. These are men that are just getting out of jail, and we are opening up our homes to them. And we know that we're not supposed to do it, but what are we supposed to do? Do we just let these people live on the street? Do we just let them live on the street? No, we open up our homes. They risk their children being on the street. And I want to be clear. I can understand why the housing authority doesn't want criminals living in public housing. I understand. Because when you have a place where there are women and children, obviously you don't want criminals and felons living in housing where there are women and children. That is understandable. But what I think a lot of these Black men who are pushing rhetoric around YouTube need to understand is that what are Black women supposed to do? If Black men don't have the community infrastructure, if Black men cannot provide the housing, if Black men cannot provide as a community protections for women, if Black men don't put each other and bring each other to task when they abandon their children, then what can these women do? Are these women supposed to starve and be homeless? We see that these women are constantly choosing to be understanding. These poor women, these are poor women that we're talking about. These women don't have money. She's over here trying to rationalize it. I know that it's not right to have them here, but I mean, they just got out of jail. What am I supposed to do? The economy is hard. What are we supposed to do? What are we supposed to do? She said, like my sister, she lost her Section 8 voucher. My sister, her daughter was 13 and got into some trouble shoplifting or something like that. They were telling her, well, you can't have her here because she's on probation. What are they supposed to do? It's like if I have family visiting and they decide they want to come over and they might see a family member's toothbrush or they might see a family member's car, their whole assumption will go to, oh, do you have a non-authorized tenant? What are they supposed to do? She said, I have a friend who her boyfriend had her address, just like to use her address. He didn't live there. He got pulled over. I think he had drugs in his car. And they went to her and they went to take her to court to take her Section 8 and all types of things because because of something he did outside of the home. She said, you're not supposed to have other people staying with you. So, I mean, she said he didn't live with her, but she let him use her address. They never said you can't. That's like if I have an uncle. Look at, she's trying to understand her friend and she starts talking about another Black man. She's like, if I have an uncle that is homeless, if I have an uncle that is homeless and he says, hey, can I use your address for a mailing address? that doesn't necessarily mean he lives with me because he uses my address as a mailing address, you know? Do these sound like women who don't care about Black men? Do these sound like women who don't care about Black men? Welfare kept Black men out of the home? Do these sound like women who are trying not to engage Black men? Do they sound like divestors to you? Do they sound like they want to be in a matriarchy to you? Why do I bring this up? I bring this up because I was open to the idea that Black women chose welfare. It didn't make sense to me, but I was like, I'll look into it. Did Black women choose welfare over husbands? I don't know that they did. I couldn't find evidence of that. I could find evidence of poor women who were desperate for love and companionship to the point where they were running to court by the hundreds. I could find evidence of women who were allowing their addresses and things to be used because they knew men who were just coming out of the prison system or who were homeless. I could find evidence of women who were trying to keep men around without breaking the rules. But you know what I didn't find one lick of evidence of is a woman who said, I'm sorry, I've got Section 8. I don't want to be with you. I'm sorry, I'm getting welfare. I don't want a relationship with a man. I could not find one court case, one interview, one government document that said that. I couldn't find one thing to prove that. And I ask you, both men and women, if we are truly honest, does this sound like anybody you know? Do these scenarios that we've talked about today sound like anybody you know? Let's just keep it 1,000. We're so tied up in this gender war that it's just starting to not make sense anymore. We're so interested in finding a guilty party. We're so interested in avoiding, like I say, all roads lead to revolution. We're so interested in avoiding the obvious problem and the obvious solution that we are at each other's throats with narratives that are completely false. And I'm not saying they're false because I'm trying to pick a side. I'm saying they're false because as I looked at the history of this and as I hear the stories of these women, it's hard for me to believe that anybody, okay, look, if you're a Black person that grew up middle class, upper middle class, maybe you really don't know about it. But look, if you are a Black person that grew up the way the majority of our Black people grew up, it's hard for me to believe that you don't know that this is how things are. It's hard for me to believe that you're just ignorant and you really in your mind believe that women didn't want men in the house. I'm having a hard time believing that people are genuinely pushing this and genuinely believe it. I'm having a hard time to believe that because the reality seems to be just the very opposite. The reality seems to be the very opposite, y'all. I said, in February, do you guys want me to do videos on relationships? And you guys voted yes. I don't know if you thought this was what I meant. I don't know. I don't know if you guys thought this was a route I was going to take with it. I mean, I plan to do some fun videos, but I don't know. I just felt like this was a conversation that was worth having. That I hope, whether you be a man or a woman, you will choose to acknowledge the truth in this dialogue and not twist it or try to deny it because it doesn't fit your personal narrative. Sometimes we just have to admit that the hill that we crawled on top of is not the hill that is worth dying on. And we have to stop expecting women to literally impoverish themselves and live on the streets to try to prove their loyalty when their loyalty has been proven. And the animosity and vitriol that I hear from women, it is vitriol. And it is vitriol. It's coming from a place of like broken desperation and exhaustion. And there are ways that we can address this, but the way that we will never address these issues is to make believe and pretend and fake about Black history, fake about the dynamic in our community, pretend that women, Black women, don't want Black men. I'm not saying every Black woman has to choose a Black man or every Black man has to choose a Black woman. I'm just saying for us to pretend that Black women push Black men out of the house by choice, I think the conversations that we have had today, and the conversation that we have yesterday prove that that is not the case. There is something else afoot here. And we are either going to be honest about what's really going on, or we're going to keep on playing in a delusion because we don't want to face what has to be done. We don't want to face the work that has to be done because there are people in community that don't want to carry the burden of the work that really needs to be put in. It's much easier to point fingers than to take action. And I just want everybody to think about that. But that's my life for today, you guys. And I will talk to you guys later.